political impact as Ukraine and a body count far beyond that seen in Gaza. Yet Sudan's civil war has barely made a dent in the public consciousness, while campuses
I admit I know very, very little about what's actually going on in Sudan, hence us watching this.
were melting down over Gaza and world leaders were scrambling to respond to Russia's invasion of its neighbor, the carnage in Sudan has been met with deafening silence. The nation's burned cities and countless dead are ignored by everyone from the Western media to the African Union. Until now, in March, the Sudanese armed forces retook the capital city following a bloody months-long campaign. For the first time since 2023, it's starting to look like one side may be heading towards victory. But even as the fall of Khartoum brings Sudan roaring back into the headlines, questions still remain. Questions about what happened next and if the world's worst war could really be reaching its climax. Questions that will have massive implications for the entire planet. For those who knew Sudan before the war, it was a head-spinning sight. The videos that flooded social media of armed men in fatigues striding through the ruins of the presidential palace, of the former seat of power in Africa's third largest nation, now shattered and pockmarked with bullet holes. The date was Friday 21st in March of 2025. That morning, the Sudanese armed forces had broken through the last line of resistance put up by their enemies, the paramilitary rapid support forces. As artillery
Which are apparently the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, are apparently backed by Dubai and a bunch of other shady, shitty actors. Anybody that Dubai is supporting, you really don't need to support. Like, people are so bedeviled and bemused by the glitzy, glossy image that the United Arab Emirates, also known as Dubai, projects. But these people are like, they literally have slaves over there, okay? They still have slaves over there. All of that glitzy, glossy shit, all that chocolate, all that gold, all that, like, first of all, the gold that Dubai is known for is actually stolen from the Sudan. Yeah. So Dubai is profiting directly from the chaos that is going on in the Sudan. So that's reason number one why you should not participate in the whole Dubai chocolate trend, which, if I recall correctly, is just appropriated Palestinian kanafa, which has been like decorated with gold, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, so Dubai is a shitty place. You should not go there. You should not patronize it. You should not let yourself be taken in by their attempt to win the cultural victory in the Middle East.
Boomed across the city. The soldiers had retaken the greatest symbol of RSF dominance. It was, as most media observers noted, a turning point in the nearly 2-year-old war. The question left unsaid was, turning towards what? After 23 months of hell, where could the conflict possibly go next? Now, if recent history is any judge, the answer is likely, well, nowhere good. Since erupting exactly 2 years ago on April the 15th, 2023, the Sudan war has gone from a bitter showdown between two generals to a full-spectrum collapse that ranks among the worst catastrophes happening anywhere on Earth. At its most basic, the fighting pits the official Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan against the paramilitary RSF under a warlord known as Hemeti. Co-leaders of a military coup that overthrew the civilian-led government in 2021, the two inevitably turned their guns on one another.
So this is basically a squabble between two warlords. Well, two aspects of a military coup that toppled the civilian-led government. Communists tend to be like so enamored of coups, okay? Coups, Maoists generally don't support coups d'etat because what happens is, what's up, Maoist? How's the culture revolution going? Well, I'm currently watching a video about what is apparently the worst war that is going on right now in the world that very few communists know about or seem to care about. So, yeah, you can't wage a cultural revolution if you're stupid.
But such a basic outline.
But yeah, anyways, Maoists generally don't support coups because Maoists are all about the masses. And the masses generally, like, they can participate in coups afterwards, but like, I just don't believe in the capability of a small faction of the military to represent the best interests of the masses. That's just me, though. Feel free to disagree.
Does not even begin to describe the carnival of horrors the warring generals have unleashed. Kicking off in the capital city, before quickly radiating outwards across the nation, the fighting has been marked by atrocities. In Khartoum alone, there have been reports of mass killings, kidnappings, looting, and the aerial bombardment of civilian areas.
There's apparently a lot of horrible shit that's taking place in regards to women as well. Warlords generally do not treat women well. That's why the Chinese Red Army, I keep going back to this point, that's why the Chinese Red Army was so very well received by the worker and peasant masses in China before the victory of the revolution, because they did not rape women, they did not carry women off to be slaves, they did not burn property, they did not steal crops, they did not, one of their principles was to not take liberties with women and not to take shit and not return it. So if you are organizing an army that is going to try to make a play for power in a war-torn, fractured country like China was during the warlord era, you might want to implement those principles.
Here's how the New York Times reported a recent visit. Entire districts have become a charred wasteland. Bullet-pocked vehicles lay scattered across deserted streets. Apartment blocks stood torched or looted, and banks were blown open.
Yeah, pretty shitty deal.
Once a sprawling...
This is the thing with the West. People watch and applaud wars that are going on abroad because, when was the last time we had a war raging in this country? The Civil War, which was pretty localized to a few locales, but a countrywide war. You had Pearl Harbor, which only impacted the immediate vicinity of the naval base in Hawaii. But we've never really had a full-scale war in living memory in this country because the United States is, as we know, an absolute bastard to try and invade. So I just don't look very kindly on Americans like myself that cheerlead and applaud wars going on abroad. Living through this stuff, if you talk to Bosnian refugees, if you talk to Somali refugees, if you talk to Sudanese refugees, yeah, it's hell. War is hell, as General William Tecumseh Sherman, who's actually buried in St. Louis, said. So, yeah. Don't just mindlessly applaud and cheerlead wars that are taking place overseas, because we've never been through this shit. We're soft over here. Oh, hello, sir. Would that explain why the Derg found itself in such an unstable footing after that coup in Ethiopia? No, the Derg found itself in an unstable footing because the Derg were absolute pieces of fucking shit that crushed, or tried to crush, the real left in the country and treated the workers and peasants like shit. People do not like military dictatorships.
Metropolis of 8 million. Today it's estimated that a mere 2 million remain, eking out a living amid the shattered skyscrapers and abandoned districts. While most of the rest have fled, a vast number have likely been killed too. In a recent study, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine used a statistical method known as capture-recapture analysis to try and estimate the death toll in the capital region. Between April 2023 and June 2024, long before this latest round of heavy fighting kicked off, the team estimated that over 26,000 had been killed in the greater Khartoum area alone.
Imagine 61,000 people in your city just disappearing. Your co-workers, your friends, your relatives, people that you go hang out with, just gone. Can you imagine the trauma that shit will cause to you?
To put that in perspective, that's over half the Hamas reported death toll for the war in Gaza. But the war hasn't just been confined to Khartoum. Even as the Sudanese
This is such a beautiful city before it was ruined.
Capital came to resemble a post-apocalyptic dystopia, other regions were sinking beneath a rising tide of blood. To the south of the capital, the region of South Kordofan erupted with its own battles. But it was to the west, in Darfur, that the worst of the fighting would take place.
It's sad. Every time you've heard about Darfur for the past 20 years, it's always been some atrocious, horrible shit happening.
The homeland of the RSF, the vast region of Darfur, was also the site of the paramilitary group's greatest successes. Even as the army's leadership fled Khartoum to establish a wartime government in Port Sudan, the SAF was able to keep resupplying bases it held within the capital. But in Darfur, the military was chased out of nearly every stronghold. For months, the RSF rampaged across the region, everywhere
You saw that the United States Defense Secretary and Pentagon said that China would be able to win a war in the simulations against their hypersonic missiles. We'd be able to sink most aircraft carriers in under an hour. Here's the thing: like we don't even know the full extent of China's military capacity. Like we don't. We have spies over there, just like they have spies over here. But like we don't know what the Chinese have until we actually go to war with them. But we're not going to go to war with them because nuclear powers do not go to war with other nuclear powers. We're going to fight proxy wars, of course, but well, I don't know why I say we. I ain't fighting shit except the protracted People's War for the liberation of New Africa on a socialist basis. But we don't even know the full extent of what the Chinese have. You don't know what your enemy has until you go to war. And no, China is not my enemy. I'm referring to this from an American perspective.
Where it went, the group bringing atrocities in its wake. When the city of El Janina fell to Hemeti's troops in the summer of 2023, up to 15,000 members of the Masalit ethnic group were slaughtered in targeted killings, while the paramilitaries encircled
Jesus, 15,000 people murdered just because of their ethnic group.
Al Fasher and the adjoining Zamzam refugee camp. They instituted a blockade that has led to an ongoing famine for the 500,000 people trapped in Zamzam. Elsewhere, RSF fighters engaged in use, enslaved civilians, and committed war crimes so disgusting that just mentioning them would get this video blacklisted. By mid-2024, the RSF seemed to be on a roll. They controlled all of Darfur, apart from the besieged holdout city of Al Fasher. Most of Khartoum was in their hands. In the south, the agricultural states of Jazeera and Sana'a had been seized. The price for all of this? One of the most harrowing sets of statistics from any conflict on the planet. Although the true death toll remains unknown, estimates by May of 2024 put the figure as high as 150,000. A quarter of the population had fled their homes. 25 million to this day are facing acute hunger, while famine has taken hold in 4 additional regions alongside Zamzam camp. As independent Egyptian outlet, Madamas.
What's currently known as the Sudan was in classical antiquity known as Nubia. And what Kassan said is that they have like Nubian pyramids are narrower than Egyptian pyramids. Like Egyptian pyramids are like wide at the base. Nubian pyramids are like tall and narrow. So the Nubians also actually conquered Egypt. I believe it was the 25th dynasty. Let me see. 25th dynasty of Egypt. Yeah, it was a Nubian dynasty. They were known as the Kushite Empire or the Black Pharaohs, and this was the extent of their rulership. This is the heartland, currently in what is known as the modern-day Sudan, and this is Egypt of classical antiquity. So, yeah, very old country that they're fighting in.
Asa wrote at the end of last summer, for over 18 months, killing, kidnapping, looting, and occupying homes and hospitals have become daily realities for many Sudanese, both in the capital and beyond. If the fighting seemed bad last summer, though, it was about to get a lot worse. After a year and a half of the Rapid Support Forces steamrolling...
Indeed, the Nubians are the real Egyptian patriots.
...all in their path, the army was about to launch a counterattack. And how the SAF got from being on the back foot in summer to celebrating in the ruins of the recaptured presidential palace would upend all the narratives surrounding this war. Just before we continue, quick plug for our fantastic newsletter. Look, imagine never you'll receive clear clarity. A lot easier thanks to our newsletter. The fate of the RSF in Khartoum had already been sealed. Back in January, the military had broken a long-standing RSF siege of its Signal Corps and General Command headquarters in Khartoum North, a sister city of the capital, otherwise known as Bari. Come February, the whole of Bari was in the army's hands, teeing up their major assault on the capital. And then came March and the final offensive against Khartoum. According to a timeline by the Sudan War Monitor, the presidential palace was encircled by Monday the 17th. Although Hemeti broadcast a defiant address ordering his men to stay and fight, the remaining RSF troops tried to cut and flee on Wednesday, only to be decimated by withering fire. Come Thursday, the survivors were holed up in the palace itself, unable to do anything but watch as the SAF tightened the noose. Of course, this is only the immediate background to the victory on March the 21st, one that ignores the months of shaping operations leading to that moment. Starting back in September, the SAF captured key bridges linking the sister city of Omdurman to both Bari and Khartoum. That done, military command pivoted to cutting off escape routes from the capital region. First, they retook the southern agricultural state of Sana'a before advancing on the province of Jazeera and its capital of Wad Madani. Longtime watchers may remember the moment that Wad Madani fell back in January. In a Situation Room episode at the time, we called it the biggest event the Sudan war has seen in months. This is because holding the city cut off RSF resupply routes into Khartoum. It was from this one victory that the cascade of army successes in the capital region flows. It's hard to overstate.
Okay, so they broke a couple of pretty nasty sieges, and they were able to get back on the front foot. That's pretty dope.
How big of a pivot this operation was. Going into September last year, the SAF seemed doomed. The war was going so badly that there was talk about overthrowing military leader General Burhan. Meanwhile, the RSF was presenting itself to other nations as an alternative government to Burhan's crumbling regime.
Yeah, so you have the war criminals, the people that are doing shit that is so horrible that this guy can't even mention him on YouTube, otherwise he'd get banned. They're proffering themselves as the legitimate government of Sudan. I imagine the United States government was very happy to see them.
The Polish Institute of International Affairs lists the countries Hemedti toured in 2024, where he was received like head of state: Kenya, Uganda, Djibouti, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and South Africa. At the time, the paramilitaries cut a deal with deposed Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, lending their rule a sheen of legitimacy. A legitimacy helped by their holding of the presidential palace and much of the capital.
Presidential palace, which they destroyed.
This is a major reason why retaking Khartoum has been such a big deal for the military. As the Sudan War Monitor wrote in the immediate aftermath of its capture, quote, "The fall of the presidential palace today represents both a tactical and symbolic victory for the Sudanese army, reasserting its legitimacy in the capital, and marks a decisive turning point in the conflict. The palace, a long-standing symbol of Sudanese governance, has been a target for the RSF, which sought to rival the army's legitimacy by controlling it."
The feds are always watching.
Before we go any further, I should quickly point out here that the RSF aren't the only ones accused of war crimes. For all the vibe from Sudan may currently be major celebrations that the army is on a roll, these guys, not exactly angels. General Burhan's troops indiscriminately shell civilian areas, use starvation as a weapon of war, and have been sanctioned by the US for all the death and suffering that they've unleashed. This just makes it all the more intriguing as to why the SAF now seem to be headed for victory. Because it's not just superior military tactics that made the recent push into the capital possible, but a series of geopolitical shifts and miscalculations that seem destined to reverberate across the Islamic world. When the Sudan War broke out, almost every...
I love how whenever one of these liberals is talking about outside actors, Iran is always front and center.
Everybody assumed that the army would win a swift and crushing victory over the RSF. After all, the military had air power, it had artillery. With two such overwhelming advantages, how could the RSF possibly compete? Well, the answer lies in the network of foreign backers aligned with Hemedti. Although a direct descendant of the Janjaweed militias that carried out the Darfur genocide, the RSF started the war with friends in high places. Specifically, the paramilitaries had fought for the United Arab Emirates in Yemen.
Yeah, anybody clicked up with the fucking Janjaweed or anybody descended from the fucking Janjaweed is probably pretty nasty.
And now Abu Dhabi seemed ready to return the favor. Using an airbase in Chad, disguised as a field hospital, the UAE began facilitating massive weapons transfers to the RSF. At the same time, the Wagner Group intervened to help the paramilitaries with air defense. Flush
Of course the Russians did.
with guns, the RSF were able to quickly neutralize the army's advantages. A process that only sped up as mercenaries poured across the borders, swelling the group's ranks. Born out of the nomadic Arab herders who'd long dominated life in Darfur, the RSF were able to attract volunteers from other nomad groups in Chad and Niger. Likewise, professional fighters from Libya, South Sudan, and Ethiopia made their way overland to join the fight. While the army had its own outside backers, principally Egypt, the sheer wealth of the network supporting the RSF made it hard to compete. Abu Dhabi even bribed
A proxy war.
Cairo to reduce its support, promising investments totaling $35 billion. Not that the SAF were
$35 billion to reduce support for a war in a country that most Americans haven't even heard of.
are completely abandoned. Turkey
They got money long.
has been accused of clandestinely shipping arms to both sides, while Russia seems to have switched its support from the RSF to the military in return for potential access to a Red Sea port. But by far the biggest outside actor helping the SAF today is Iran. Having sat on the sidelines for the first year of the war, the Islamic Republic threw its weight behind the army at the very end of 2023. By summer, regular weapons deliveries from Tehran were making their way to Port Sudan. Not long after, the military launched its counter-offensive. Yet had support begun and ended with Iran, we wouldn't be sat here discussing the fall of Khartoum. No. To advance, as they're doing today, the army needed allies inside Sudan too. And here's where it gets complicated. When war erupted, Sudan was already a patchwork of ethnic militias and armed rebels, many of whom had long fought against the central government. With the army...
Maybe that's things. Maybe this is like it's like a glimpse into the future as to where America is heading. Balkanization seems to be the watchword of the century.
Representing that old era of centralized control under an Islamist regime, many of these groups were happy to sit out the fight, so long as it didn't impact their region or their kinfolk. But as the war ground on, many of these groups found themselves forced to choose. And while a handful, such as the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, threw their lot in with the RSF, plenty more decided to back the army. And the reasons why, they're not hard to fathom. Despite the army's callous bombarding of civilian areas, the way the RSF treats the people it conquers is orders of magnitude worse. In Darfur, the group has carried out ethnic cleansing against multiple groups. On the outskirts of Khartoum, its soldiers funneled men into a torture center comparable to anything seen in Assad's Syria. In the other cities, the group controls enslavement and sexual violence are commonplace.
Yeah, when you talk about the RSF, you have to talk about like the absolute atrocious fucking war crimes that they're committing, particularly against women. There's quite a few Sudanese accounts, Sudanese women accounts on Twitter that are consistently talking about this. It's pretty gross and brutal and horrible shit. Like even beyond the typical ethnic cleansing type wars that seem to pervade this region.
Middle East Monitor summed up the general disgust when it wrote about, quote, prisoners freed by the army from homes and camps that had been converted into makeshift detention centers, and spoke of videos of torture, abuse, and food deprivation. Some had died, and no one was allowed to bury them. Some survivors appeared to be in a deplorable state. Others were little more than skeletons, unable to be rescued, dying within days of their release. End quote. Do you remember in Fate Zero when Caster goes so out of control that all the other fighters have to put their differences aside and team up to end his rampage? Well, that's basically what happened in Sudan in the face of the RSF onslaught. In North Darfur, ethnically Zakhawa militias formed the Darfur Joint Protection Force, which soon aligned with the army. Elsewhere, armed Islamist groups sided with the military, as did some of the pro-democracy groups that had helped overthrow longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir in 2019. This, to be blunt, is an incredible turnaround. Not long ago, most of these groups wanted the military out of Sudan's future. In a world where the RSF were less bloodthirsty, you can almost imagine them supporting anyone who'd knock the army down a peg. But that world doesn't exist. And so we have the spectre of some of Sudan's most disparate groups coming together to defeat Hemeti's goons. Not that it's only outrage at RSF atrocities that are driving some to pick up arms. The Polish Institute of International Affairs highlights the role of ethnicity as well. Quote, the enlistment was massive because, in the eyes of most Sudanese, the activities of the RSF constituted an occupation by a minority group. Its social base represents about 7% of the Sudanese population and foreigners. Whatever the real driver, though, the fact is that by the back half of 2024, the SAF had built up a wide network of alliances. A very unstable network, yes, one that seems unlikely to survive any post-war peace, but nonetheless a network capable of inflicting stinging defeats on the paramilitaries. But notice that we used the plural form there, stinging defeats, rather than a single, final defeat. And that's because it remains an open question as to whether the RSF can be totally defeated. For all Hemeti may have lost Khartoum, there are signs that completely driving his men out of Sudan might be more difficult than anyone is willing to admit. Made up of 5 states in Sudan's far west, Darfur is a largely arid region that's home to roughly 11 million people. It's also unimaginably vast, so vast that it could swallow California and almost rival Spain in sheer size. It also happens to be both the home region of the Rapid Support Forces and the place where they've put down the deepest roots into governing structures. In 4 states, the army has been completely expelled. In the 5th, North Darfur, it remains only a minor presence, holed up in its 6th Infantry Division headquarters in the city of El Fasher, a city of around 1.5 million that at the time of writing has been under siege by the RSF for almost a year. That El Fasher is besieged rather than in RSF hands is mostly thanks to the joint forces, local ethnic militia that have sided with the army. But even while they've had success keeping the RSF from overthrowing and looting the city, repelling over 180 attacks, signs are that time might be running out. The day before Khartoum's presidential palace fell to the military, the RSF took control of the desert city of Al-Malia. While small, Al-Malia sits in a strategic crossroads heading towards El Fasher. With its conquest, army efforts to relieve the siege have become that much harder. And that's worrying, because it suggests that the RSF is far from a spent force in its home region. Should the military attempt to build on its successes in the capital by advancing on Darfur, we could witness fighting beyond anything yet seen. In part, that's because the RSF has a strong local base of support in parts of Darfur, especially in the south and east. But it's also due to the support of outside actors. As PISM recently wrote at the group, quote, "The RSF has been sourcing reinforcements through Libya in recent weeks, including groups of Colombian mercenaries recruited by the UAE and columns of combat vehicles from General Khalifa Haftar's forces, among others." End quote. Perhaps foolishly, the army is doing its utmost to give those outside actors reason to keep backing the RSF. Deputy Commander of the Sudanese Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Yasser al-Attah, recently threatened to bomb UAE's resupply base in neighboring Chad, a move which Chad threatened would amount to a declaration of war. Not content
That certainly was needed, more war.
with the prospect of one interstate conflict, Attah likewise threatened to attack RSF outposts in South Sudan. This points to one of the international community's biggest worries about the Sudan conflict, the potential for spillover into other nations. Already, the war has destabilized neighboring South Sudan so much that it appears on the brink of its own civil war. Army airstrikes on Chad would simply expand the fighting even further. Luckily, most analysts think the army isn't foolish enough to start an interstate war while also trying to defeat the RSF. And that's probably for the best, as an army campaign to liberate Darfur could be bloody in the extreme. The worries are twofold. One, that Hemeti's forces are so dug in that expelling them will be far more difficult than it was in Khartoum. And 2, that as the army marches west, its fragile coalition may start to crack apart. As the Associated Press notes, the advances in Khartoum may cause strains to break open in the military's coalition. The military has been backed by a coalition of armed factions, including former Darfur rebels and Islamist brigades that are historic rivals, united only by the goal of fighting the RSF. Any of those strains breaking open would severely limit the effectiveness of the army's forces, especially since elements of the RSF may retreat to the desert to launch an insurgency campaign, harrying advancing columns.
Yes, I did see that. Figueras. He didn't just he did ignore them, but the cops also came. Bernie has a habit of doing that. Like, I don't even see the purpose of these fucking rallies besides to continue to sheepdog people. Like, that's the goal. That's the role that Bernie and AOC have had for the past decade almost. And now I saw a stupid meme on Twitter where they were hanging out at Coachella or somewhere, and it was like, oh, the successor. Like, first of all, like, do we live in a feudal monarchy? Like, what the fuck is going on? But yeah. That's what happens when you rely on liberals and people who are aligned with liberals. So, do not align yourself with liberals. Do not let yourself be hope poisoned with liberal bullshit, because when you do, bad things happen and hilarity ensues, and not the type of hilarity that we need. Let's listen to some JD Pod. The boys. Hmm. Reflections on the 2024 American with three Ks elections.
Was starting to, he's losing his fastball a little bit. He wasn't as, spirited as he'd been. The whole assassination attempt thing kind of fizzled out. JD Vance is an oaf, but for whatever, I mean, there's plenty of reasons one could say, and we'll get into that a little bit. And we're not trying to be the podcast that's doing this sort of like horse race stuff, but I was just particularly like, okay, I mean, I guess he's going to be president again. Like, let's see what positives could come out of this as far as revolutionary struggle is concerned, as far as like
very dialectical,
sharpening contradictions is concerned, because I knew for a fact that if Harris had won, things would actually be a lot harder as far as revolutionary organizing is concerned, even within the
yes. Here come the grids.
And I think
I do the grids just to torture you.
My perspective is that things would.
I'm sorry, we're not in a fucking Eastern European fairy castle land. You gotta have the grids. This is an American city. Well, a new African city called Nash City, named after Nash City, named after the organizer Diane Nash.
It's like what people think about when they hear Chiapas on the left.
Yeah, Chiapas is home to the Zapatista rebellion that happened in the mid '90s. It's the poorest region of Mexico, I believe, the poorest state in Mexico. And the Zapatista rebellion really captured the imagination of people around the world when it happened. I know for me, as like a kid, the band Rage Against the Machine had this live concert DVD from Mexico City, and they included within that a documentary, like a mini documentary on the Zapatista rebellion that put it in the context of the Battle of Seattle and and the WTO protests and discussion of NAFTA. And I saw that when I was 12 years old. And so that agglomeration of things in my head was really, really profoundly important to my.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, but could you explain just like for those that aren't aware of it, like what the Battle of Seattle was, and also NAFTA? You don't have to go into too much detail, but just enough to like root people that might not have heard, might not know, because we're getting old.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all a little bit before my time, even, because I was barely. I mean, when the Zapatista rebellion happened, I don't think I'd even been born yet. And during the Battle of Seattle, I was, a baby basically. But
wee bear.
This kind of brings us full circle, because all this happens during the Clinton years and the Democrat.
Boo.
All this is happening then, right? So you have this North American Free Trade Act, NAFTA, that gets passed in the 90s.
That's not going to happen.
We could get into like a lot of the
keep dreaming
of what it entailed, but essentially it created free trade zones.
If anything, China will adapt our grids.
Continent, but of course, the United States and Canada both being imperial nation states, formations. The one state that was hardest hit, and the working and oppressed people of which were hardest hit, was Mexico. The traditional kind of classic example is how, because of the instantiation of this free trade agreement, Mexican markets were flooded with cheap American corn, which made it so that
fucking corny, bro.
Mexico, obviously, the staple food product is corn. I mean, corn is sacred; it always has been since pre-Mayan times. It's the staple crop. And so a vast majority of agrarian producers in Mexico were producing corn. And when you have cheap, mass-produced, GMO American corn flooding your markets, a lot of farmers are going to, just be completely shit out of luck.
What are you guys' takes on GEOs anyway? GMOs.
This is actually one of the things that really...
I would actually support them if we were actually under a socialist system. See, capitalism fucks up shit that could be dope. Because, like, genetically modified shit, there's a basis for it to exist under socialism. We don't need people starving to death. And preventing starvation could be done by genetically modifying crops to produce a higher yield. But under capitalism, what you have is it being manipulated to prevent people from growing their own crops. Like, you cannot take a genetically modified apple seed and grow an apple tree. Because they don't want you doing that. If you can grow an apple tree, why would you need to go buy their apples? So, yeah. Capitalism ruins everything.
You know, the United States context, like what the reasons.
Cream. Capitalism ruins everything around me.
Kind of clearer understanding was super important.
And yes, anything that helps people not starve is good. But the capitalists, the imperialists, they want it so that they want to fix it so that if you don't pay them, then you're starving. So
Obviously not the level of other rebellions that have occurred throughout the history of the United States. That was at the World Trade Organization conference that was held in Seattle that year. I forget exactly what year it was. Maybe it was 99?
99.
Yeah, 99.
ooh.
And it was, you know, this really important moment for the Western left in some ways. And it was, I mean,
Yeah, like Monsanto, which is based in my city, St. Louis. You got these assholes that don't want you growing your own food, so they will literally sue you if they catch you manipulating or playing with their shit. It's very shitty, but we're talking of capitalism, which is very shitty.
In order to like fight against those things was to fight against the empire, and to rebel against those things was rebel against the empire.
Really like these little Chinese style dragon gates. Can't have too many of them though.
Like what was it, like in Seattle?
Oh, I mean, yeah.
I'm trying to remember the line, but it doesn't matter really. But
we held hands in the streets of Seattle. Yeah.
When it came time to throw the brick through the Starbucks window, you left me all alone, all alone. Hell yeah!
Oh my gosh.
An anarchist.
Yeah. But so there's that came to mind, and I was just like laughing to myself. But it also comes at a specific moment that is important, which is this alter globalization movement, this budding up to what became the World Social Forum in Brazil and elsewhere, and even people like world systems theorists that were coming from a Marxist.
I don't want curves in the road.
Hailing, like Emmanuel Waller.
How about I put a curve in your ass?
Hailing. We're like,
oh wow, that sounded weird.
About the potentiality of sort of movements from below and sort of fragmentary movements to combat imperialism. And I think we can say, I mean, obviously this comes at after the collapse, not just the collapse, the forced like implosion of the Soviet Union, and I would say it happened way before then. But you know, with the Berlin Wall falling and everything else,
and a lesser.
There, I have one little bitty curve in the road.
The counter-revolution globally against. I mean, you had all these.
I don't know.
States, particularly on the
if y'all haven't realized at this point that I just be saying shit, then I pity y'all.
Like multi-party elections and like forced to undergo structural adjustment policies. And I mean, a lot of the groundwork was laid for in the 80s, of course, but in the beginning of the 90s, you see.
This is JD Pod.
No longer have a one-party state.
A couple of my comrades from California chopping it up about third worldism and shit that's going on around the world.
The Soviet Union has fallen, and you lose the major trading partner bloc that you once had.
Right, and this is when we sort of talk about delinking and maneuvering room that you can have. This is the point where
I apologize.
Margaret Thatcher.
I should not have done that. That was a very mean thing to say.
Saying that there's no alternative. So all of this, like, sort of roots us in that period, like, of
I don't want any burger that's made in Serbia, though. Y'all might have human meat in that shit.
In that moment. I think 94 right when the NAFTA agreement gets signed into law, they announce their rebellion. I used to research Zapatistas because I was an anarchist and was also interested in they get compared a lot of times to Rojava and other like forms of like non-state sovereignty and movement building and stuff.
Mediterranean heritage, medium density housing. Interesting.
Somewhat Maoist.
It's some Cali shit in this bitch.
And then it sort of took its own sort of somewhat indigenous.
I'll take your word for it.
Sort of that became very decentralized.
Why would I come to Serbia, though? I heard that y'all don't like black people out there.
That plays into the fact that there's still like autonomous zones in Chiapas that are mostly governed by collectivities engaged in and with the Zapatistas, but not like formally controlled by the Zapatistas. And there's like a really rich history there and ongoing struggle.
Jesus,
that I kind of became aware.
And you say I'm weird.
A little bit in the lead up to my trip to Chiapas, because when I was there, I didn't visit any of these autonomous zones or anything like that. But there's definitely some interesting politics that are at play. And I mean, like, honestly, one of the big takeaways, and I didn't really mention this when I was talking to you before the show, Joma, was there's a lot of Claudia Scheinbaum like messaging, posters, graffiti, things like that all over Chiapas.
It's because Claudia Scheinbaum has a very, very good regime aura.
And who's that?
Claudia Scheinbaum is the relatively newly elected president of Mexico, the first female president in Mexico.
We like black people, just don't say you are American. I mean, it's going to be very obvious that I'm American as soon as I open my fucking mouth.
Manuel Lopez Obrador, who was the previous president of Mexico. And
maybe in a pinch I could pass as Canadian, but I mean, I have a pretty thick American accent, bro.
Which is interesting, right?
Yeah, and I think, like, to a certain extent, that left populist project similar to, like, Venezuela or Bolivia, other states throughout Latin America, even though to this point, the Morena sort of project has gone nowhere near, like, the level of Venezuela. I think that's, like, appealing as much as anything to people, in some ways more than, like, this decentralized.
I have to hide my nationality to get along in Serbia.
Because, like,
what has the world come to?
On this, and I'm not well versed enough, but there is something of a respect for indigenous peoples, and I mean, obviously, it's probably going to be incomplete and imperfect, and way less to an extent than Venezuela. But I think that project has captured the imagination of people to the point where, I don't know, it was just interesting to see, and it was definitely interesting to engage. And then I saw, like, things for some autonomous collectives. I saw Hammers and Sickles. I saw ACB graffiti. It's definitely a very, like, it's definitely a place where I didn't see any sort of conservative presence as such or anything like that.
I know this isn't a podcast about the Zapatistas, but it just hit my brain. I used to work at Apple. Do you know that? Yeah. In undergrad. It was, I had like 3 jobs, and I was doing retail, and there was someone that was like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Chiapas, just visiting," and I was like, "Oh hell yeah, like the Zapatistas," and he kind of scoffed at me, and he's like, "Oh yeah, the Zapatistas," like, and I don't know why that came to mind. Maybe just like it's not just like all just like imagine like understanding of like, oh, this like all of Chiapas is the Zapatistas and like this indigenous resistance. It's like, well, no, there's a whole like society there.
My understanding is that during the rebellion, they took over like the major municipalities, most of the major municipalities, and then as part of their negotiations with the Mexican state, they had to withdraw from some of them, including San Cristobal de las Casas, which is where I was staying mostly, which is like the cultural heart and former capital of Chiapas. It's the main place, I guess, like tourists stay. But the Zapatistas had taken that over, but they obviously do not have control and haven't had control over that area in at least 20 years.
You know, I have not paid all that much attention to 505. How do you even say that? 5051? I haven't paid them all that much attention. I don't. For one, I'm not in the habit of trusting organizations that are just a bunch of numbers. Like, what do they even do? I heard they're big out in Cali, but like, what is their MO? What is their purpose for existing?
And the supposed disappearance of national liberation. On a world scale, and so
and a history of movements, and like why, if you meet these older organizers in different spaces, they have this rosy-eyed view of the way things might have been in the 90s and 2000s, or they have a different sort of political vision that is not even like necessarily socialist sometimes, or to the extent that it is, it's like
nobody is socialist. I'm the only real socialist. It's some American liberal organization that I think has come to existence in the past year or so, with the ostensible goal of fighting Trump.
Came of age in a time where it was very anti-neoliberalism, anti-globalization, but you also couldn't discuss the Soviet Union or these histories of decolonization unless it was like the Zapatistas.
Or unless it was in a like discrete like antagonism to those projects.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But okay, and so for me, where I was on election day, I had class all day and work.
I think I spent election day with you motherfuckers.
Got home late, like around 8 p.m., and even beforehand, I presumed that Trump was going to win. I was on quote unquote on record on Twitter.
Pretty much.
Saying that like
those hands-off people were funny. It's surprising. Well, it's not all that surprising that you know about them as a Serb, because they were like extremely pro-NATO. Like one of the demands of the hands-off coalition, so to speak, was hands-off NATO. And I'm like, you people
about
just do not want to be anti-imperialists.
she ran a perfect
Well, actually, they're
campaign, like,
they're actively
like,
imperialists. Like, these people actually support imperialism because they think it's good for the American
it's
economy.
baked in my brain forever. But
One of their major
the
critiques of
United
Trump
States
is that they think he's
seemed
fucking up
right
the
to build
imperialist money
stone
train.
walls. But
Very sad,
as,
very
like, the
disgusting.
poll results were coming in and like the swing states and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, this is worse than I presumed. Worse than I presumed for people that were really hoping for a Kamala presidency. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I was laughing the whole time as the results are coming, and I'll explain why.
Yo, man, you fucking psycho.
And immediately after, I think I went to bed before like final results were in, but I tweeted out that America is 4% of the world population, and that a Trump presidency is no different for 96%, if not 100% of the world. The primary difference is that the wolf doesn't need the sheep clothing.
The thing with Americans is that most Americans don't even know the rest of the world exists or actively want to prey on and destroy the rest of the world. All libs are disgusting. And you know, I used to have a little bit of time for them. Like, nobody slides out of their mom's womb as a Marxist-Leninist Maoist. Nobody. But, like, just seeing how they move through these two administrations, it's just been disgusting and weird. Like, I have less and less time for liberals every day.
Positioned in the world system at a place to be able to de-link. That's sort of, to me, and I don't know if you agree, and we can talk about it, but I think that's sort of that's partly our task as third worldists in the imperialist core, is to strike material blows.
Oh no, somebody's been
US
moided.
Imperialism, to provide support to those that are as well, and to build that capacity, and then to support anti-systemic movements, or what we could call national liberation movements, that are striking blows at U.S. imperialism and fighting U.S. Imperialism. And so that was my initial response, was like, Kamala is not going to be any different. Maybe a more sophisticated, like, running of the U.S. state apparatus. Like, I don't think any sort of liberal interventionism is going to be any less bloody for most of the world and less violent than sort of the wild card.
I don't know, what do you call a German communist without gender dysphoria?
Immediately, what also came to mind was Comrade George Jackson in Blood in My Eye. And so he wrote this in San Quentin prison in 1971, I believe. And he writes, "The fascists already have power. The point is that some way must be found to expose them and combat them. And
Expose and combat
is like choosing which way one wishes to die. The holder of so-called high public office is always merely an extension of the hated ruling corporate class. It is to our benefit that this person be openly hostile, despotic, and unreasoning."
Hear that?
And so I think, for me, that's why I wasn't saying, I don't know if I would. I was hoping for a Trump presidency, just to be honest. Like, I think he's an idiot and like whatever, but I think that the conditions are better for organizing and striking blows at U.S. empire, and I think goes down to what we see as our role, what one would see as their role in as communists in America with 3Ks. Like, I was thinking about 2016.
Your mom went to the 50501 protest in your city and told me I should go to STL's hands-off protest. You lied about going and you actually wanted trained. That's very good. You're in STL. You should come to STL DSA's Socialist Night School tonight.
And so I was living in Florida at the time, and
I know you follow our page.
I was organizing with.
I hope you follow our page. You should follow our page.
2016. Yeah.
Yeah, come to Socialist Night School. I will be there.
Because that was, I guess, where my sort of political consciousness was.
Yes, that's tonight.
And there were other, like, established quote-unquote organizations that were present as well, but trying to stop.
You gotta pay attention.
And there was a lot of political education going on because people weren't.
Oh my word! We're running out of money.
No, we both been.
That'll never do. Who should I cut?
And I think
the cops.
That his quote, he talks about
defund the police.
I'd rather I respect someone like Goldwater who says, "I'm not for you. as opposed to the liberal that will say like
Bet.
the sly fox or whatever that you don't even realize you've been eaten.
I believe it's up on my Twitter and on our Twitter.
You realize
I'm gonna have to scroll a little bit down on DSASTL's Twitter, but
Kamala
yeah.
presidency would have.
Look forward to seeing you there in a couple hours.
The same violence would be happening, but liberals would still be at lunch. And for 96% of the world, U.S. imperialism would be obliterating them. And so
Great. Look at me. I just had to take an IOF loan. IMF loan.
Areas where U.S. imperialism is at its most
large village. Very large village.
At its most openly violent.
Brutal.
As most brutal. Whoever's president.
Wasn't there a Frederick Douglass quote about that?
Just wait till you see what Trump's going to do to Gaza. It's like,
I don't know. Good question. I'll try to find that.
Look what Kamala did to Gaza and Biden. Look what the Democrats did to Gaza.
I wouldn't be surprised if he said that. I think he was kind of black pill on America towards the end, to be honest.
And so there's no difference between the two. And this is something that I organized within the National Democratic Movement in the Philippines. And this is something that I don't have it pulled up right now, but the statements that were made from, and we'll put it in the show notes, from Bayan, which is a national chapter, a national organization, the part of the ND movement, that was saying basically whether it's a Trump presidency or whether it's a Kamala Harris presidency, the work remains the same and it wouldn't have made a difference, both to the struggle in the Philippines, but also to those in Gaza that are fighting U.S. imperialism and its proxy, the IOF, the Israeli occupation forces. And so those were the initial thoughts. Like, fuck Trump, obviously. But and maybe there was a little bit of a this is like watching, sort of seeing, one, the chickens coming home to roost, but also seeing like, yeah, this is what you get. Like, you sow fascism abroad. I think another thing I like was sharing with friends is that quote from Aimé Césaire, who's from Martinique, and he wrote a really important book called Discourses on Colonialism. And he writes, "What am I driving at? At this idea that no one colonizes innocently. A sick civilization, a civilization which is morally diseased, which irresistibly, progressing from one consequence to another, one denial to another, calls for its Hitler, I mean its punishment." End quote. And not that I'm trying to like make comparisons between Trump and Hitler, but like it. So there's a part of me that when he won, I was like, yeah, this is like, we deserved it. We being like America with 3 Ks, and maybe we can talk about this more. But I think fundamentally, what people's responses to this shows their political horizons or education, and then 2, what they see as what needs to be done.
Absolutely. And I think this gets us a little bit to some of the common responses I see, particularly from people who aren't as baked into like revolution.
You know, Tito is actually my favorite revisionist. I think I've said this before. I might do a stream about it, but like, dude did not give 0 fucks, and he took care of his people, which is really all you should ask of a leader of that sort, anyways. But I just like him because he told Stalin to go fuck himself. Nobody did that. Only Tito and Mao told Stalin to go fuck themselves. Hacha was too busy riding Stalin's dick. But like, you have to have had some balls to do that.
They're seeing a lot of the discourse that's coming out, especially from people who are Trump supporters. I'm talking specifically about women, non-binary people, trans people who like see these like accounts online.
Also, he is the only resistance leader in World War II to liberty. Wait, didn't Hacha have a guerrilla resistance as well?
Like, you know, it gets more disgusting than that. I need to like repeat every single thing, but you know, this flourishing of like the feeling that, you know, there can be an openness about your you know, vile, like anti-human intentions, right? And in turn too, there's the question of reproductive health and like the fact that the more openly fascistic right in this country, knowing that the liberals are also fascists, as Joma so eloquently put it through quoting Césaire, the entire imperial power structure is fascist, and it always has been. That includes everything from FDR under the New Deal to Donald Trump, right? They're all fascists. They're just, you know, there's some minor differences here and there, but they both maintain imperialism, both
the Barbara Pit,
the so-called United States and abroad. Anyway, not to digress. But
everybody shall go to Barbara Pit. You have displeased Tito.
We're trying to get people to have more of a third worldist perspective. we need to be sensitive to those concerns and also explain why those concerns will never be fully allayed regardless of who's in the White House. And I think one key thing is, for example, that reproductive rights were already taken away and have never been fully complete in the United States.
Yeah, and the Greeks also butchered their own protracted people's war. Tabor, that snitch motherfucker, talks about it in War of the Flea.
Bear the disproportionate brunt of the negative effects of attempting to get reproductive health care, if they can even get it at all. The fact that in so-called red states, reproductive access has never been complete and has always consistently been taken away, and has been taken away even more so under the Biden presidency of the past 4 years. I mean, having a Democrat in office did not give you even the bare minimum of universal access to abortion, for example, and other sort of funding for reproductive health care. And then again, so those are important concerns to people in the first world who, again, if our project is, and this isn't everyone's project, and it shouldn't be everyone's project to win over people in the first world, but if it is our project that we need to try to win over people in the first world to some sort of third worldist perspective for the purpose of more completely realizing any sort of revolutionary change and creating comrades in that struggle.
Have I heard of those crazy monks on Mount Athos that hate Catholics so much that when the Pope and Patriarch excommunicated each other, they started throwing Molotov cocktails? No, I did not. That sounds very Greek, though.
Self-determination, and as their consciousness grows, I can only imagine that they will not.
That definitely sounds like something that Greeks would do.
Socialist movement, but will be
filthy malaka! You cannot unexcommunicate those heretics.
I wanted to bring up the fact that.
But what about the American Communist?
Costos, quite gasoline.
That's a topic for another episode, I guess. Maybe it's not even relevant enough to be another episode. But
no, they want a high deputy chief or a deputy high bailiff, a seat in Vermont.
No shit. That's seriously.
He allowed the Ustasha and Chetniks into the partisans.
By 2 votes.
Yeah, that's kind of shitty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
should have done that, bro.
The 2 votes was someone voting for Sinwar. I think it was. Doesn't matter, but they won like a bailiff seat in Vermont.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
They're talking about those ACP jabronis.
Or the X update since you've been touching grass and offline.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I'm good. I'm so proud of you, Nate, for touching grass and getting offline.
But anyway, I did want to bring up this exit polling data, which again gives us a sense of what needs to be done if you are, especially a white person in the Imperial Corps, for whom the prospects are.
It sounds pretty gay. They banned women from their island to the point where one of the monks whose mom died when he was first born had never seen a woman his whole life. That sounds like a gay paradise.
So according to this polling data from the...
Well, as a gay man myself, I would probably die if I never saw a woman my whole life.
Voted for Donald Trump. That's a majority. And within the so-called swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, it ranged from anywhere between 53% to 71% of all white people. Yeah, of all white people voting for Donald Trump. And this was consistent
dumbasses.
Even according to the so-called division of sex. White women voted 53% in favor of Donald Trump, and white men it was 60.
I'm looking at this.
Dumb asses.
This is from, I think you already said, from AP.
Dumb.
Georgia, and the second highest was also in the South of 62%. Unless I'm missing one. Yeah, no, 62% in North Carolina.
So, I mean, again, like, we're talking about the majority of white people in this country, at least the politically conscious white people, which is even more worse. Like, the ones who care enough to even vote are voting in favor of, like, the most open form of fascism you could possibly imagine. Not even the covert form of fascism or the more covert form of fascism in the form of the Democratic Party. They are openly fascistic. They are open fascists. And I think, like, rather than focusing on even this election, you need to sit with what that means that so many white people vote for an open fascist. They see their interests as coinciding with having fascists in office. And as a white person,
Indeed, happy 89th anniversary to the first Palestinian armed rebellion.
Like that.
And against Zionism, of course.
Move your focus away from like this electoral politics and honestly, frankly, from your own basic self-interest in terms of like what you're talking about in terms of like the election or the results of the election, and think about, well, what does it mean that so many people who share a similar structural position in the settler state of the United States, who have always had
the son of the first Serbian leader, Saint Sava, ran away from the royal court and then established a monastery there. Well, you all even have your own Buddha? Fascinating.
Capitalist, in the most vulgar way of putting that possible. You've always maintained a fealty to white.
Look how crooked my roads are. You should be pleased.
That over the course of centuries, and this is the people who you are supposedly trying to organize.
Have I given up on struggling to bring about a Maoist organization in the United States? No. I just don't think that a book club is an acceptable substitute for a Marxist-Leninist Maoist party. And I think that choosing to willfully remain aloof from the largest organization of people who call themselves socialists in the United States is very dumb. But no, I will never give up the struggle for a Maoist party in the United States.
As far as being openly fascistic,
the main issue with Maoism in the United States is the Maoists, to be honest.
So if you think that you're going to do anything to serve your self-interest by voting for a Democrat, you need to understand that most of the people you share a structural position with see their interests as being with Donald Trump. And if you hate Donald Trump, then you should be like not looking to vote for the lesser of two evils to like simply try to protect a very small modicum of rights.
No, BRG never gives up.
Of these sorts of things. But you need to realize that you need to completely abandon whiteness as a whole and
abandon whiteness as a whole. Hear that, white folk?
Empire as a whole. And cast your lot in with 96% of the world's population who don't give a shit about this election.
Or more.
Yeah, more.
I appreciate that. Like gentle critique, you're right. Like more than 96%. Like when you factor in, actually, wait a second, all of these oppressed nations within the so-called settler colony of the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Many of whom don't even have the right to vote for various reasons, all these other sorts of things. I mean,
and Nate and I are coming from California, so-called California, and I'm just thinking about all of this. Proposition 6 was about removing slavery, legalized slavery from prisons, and 53% voted no to overturning it, to removing that.
Yeah, a majority of Californians voted to uphold slavery.
Still, and to maintain slavery, and I think it's 16 states still allows slavery if you're imprisoned.
That should be the number, yeah, including California.
And so yeah, there was a big push, and I know you know more. Maybe you can say more about it since you work in this is more of your world. But yeah, go ahead. Like it was like the liberalness of.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah. So this campaign, even though there are a lot of formerly incarcerated people, a lot of colonized people working on it to try and for very obvious reasons, like. It was funny. I was in a meeting, so I was in training or meeting about this proposition, and I mean, this could be a whole thing in and of itself. But a couple weeks ago, where this formerly incarcerated brother was saying he was quoting George Jackson, and then,
hell yeah.
But at the same time too talking about. But then I mean, and like I could see his position. I think this is just the way counterinsurgency works. Where he was talking about how liberal the messaging was of this bill. Like, you had to literally explain to people, like, oh, yeah, this doesn't even mean...
Am I advocating an intriest approach to building a Maoist organization? No, an intriest approach would be if I had already had an independent Maoist organization and we entered DSA and MASC. Why are you asking me this shit?
And also...
Shit. If you disagree with what I'm doing, go do your own thing. What the fuck are you asking me for? I do my thing, you do yours. Let's see which is most successful and which yields a Maoist party. Like, pretty much all Maoists do in the United States is complain and complain and whine and critique. Like, where is our party at? Y'all are always talking about, we need a party. We need to go build the fucking party, man. Worried about what everybody else is doing. Go build the fucking party. Damn. Shit, it's not like we're getting any younger. It's not like shit is getting better where we won't even need a party.
forced labor, even though it's a huge problem. It's the fact that they're in the prisons themselves.
Instead of complaining and critiquing and whining endlessly, just go do your own fucking thing.
As liberal as possible reform to just do the fucking.
Mao taught us that correct line comes through practice, not through
labor in prisons, which like
forever being annoying.
If were able to get this passed, then they could just stop talking about this issue forever. But they probably would stop talking about this issue forever, and that couldn't even happen because of the.
But no, my goal is not to turn DSA into a Maoist organization. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, and that's something. Yeah, that was surprising to me. I mean, I always already have a low expectation. Yeah, that's something I was sitting with. Like,
why would I want to be the new? Why do people always want to find the new this, the new that?
That I'm still sitting with is just how reactionary.
I'm BRG. That's who I am. That's who I will remain.
And of course, like,
quit trying to be everybody else. Be yourself.
Created? Does it fall from the sky? Like, no, it's from your conditions, and so I don't feel like I want to like just blame.
Because when you try to be everybody else, then you're going to fuck it up because nobody can be you or nobody can be anybody else better than the person themselves. Huey P. Newton is dead. He left us many writings. He left us an entire example of a life. But I'm not trying to be Huey P. Newton. I don't want to be Huey P. Newton. Huey P. Newton is dead, and we live in remarkably different concrete conditions than those in which Huey P. Newton organized. So why would I want to be the new Huey P. Newton? That's stupid. I'm BRG. I will remain BRG.
Kind of has a similar pedigree to Kamala, where he was.
Yes, that is precisely the issue with Western Maoists. They form a reading group / party and have no connection to the masses, and think that they will be the vanguard because they read the most. Reading does not make you a vanguard. You could read until you're blind. If you're not connected to the masses, and if you haven't rooted yourselves in actual concrete social practice, the masses are not going to follow you. If nobody follows you, then you are, by definition, not the vanguard.
Sweeping homeless people out of the places that they stay, basically putting them into camps for like.
Thoughts on PSL? PSL has never done anything to me. I think they're a revisionist party, but they're all right.
He's also
we have a pretty decent working relationship with them here in STL. I don't consider them enemies, but there's a reason I'm in DSA, not in PSL. Why do you all ask me about organizations of which I'm not a member? If you want to find out about PSL, ask somebody that's in PSL or ask somebody that has been in PSL. I have never been in PSL. I have line disagreements with PSL.
Forced to engage in order to survive. Those are being further and further criminalized. And then
if you ask me what organization should I join, I'm going to tell you DSA. Why would I tell you to join another organization?
With the state, which is embedded with corporations, that's what fascism is, and all in service of maintaining capitalist imperialism, are producing a narrative which is further and further and further infecting people's minds, for like lack of a better way of putting it, and forces them to like be to have this inhuman view of other people. This view of people as parasites, or people a view of people as like being unworthy of life, unworthy of living, and those are the enemies of society, and those are the people who need to be cast out and or exterminated in order for society to function as normal and for things to get back to normal. I think we can see like criminalized populations, unhoused populations as being the specific targets, and of course those are mostly, again, colonized people in California, and then in turn you can broaden that out, and it's all under Democrats. It's all under, in like the bluest state, the state that gets, California, whatever the fuck, stupid rhetoric gets used about it. This is like the most quote unquote liberal state in the country, and it's one of the most fascistic states in the country, openly so. And it's the state where, everyone has access to abortions or stuff here, but like at the same time too, like, and that'll never go away here, by the way. At the same time too, they're throwing people into camps, and I don't know about you, but I'm not going to go to brunch while people are being thrown into camps. You know what I mean?
How would Maoism work in urbanized countries? What do you mean?
But let's move into like more kind of concrete sort of understanding.
You mean how would a Maoist protracted people's war work in urbanized countries? I mean, there is a pretty firm foundation and basis for the theorization of urban guerrilla warfare and urban protracted people's war. I think the three examples that we should look to are Palestine, Northern Ireland, aka Ulster, and Syria.
because I was just sort of thinking through what is our historic task.
There is a good Instagram profile called Isolate PSL that has documented the many issues. U.S. government connections of PSL. Yeah, I think they did work with Ramsey Clark, who was the Attorney General under LBJ. Dude was old as shit. But, yeah.
And
everybody has dirty laundry.
So I put out, just as I was thinking, quote, if you're in America with 3Ks, our task is twofold.
We have people that are literally being disappeared, and you all want to talk about old organizational tea. You got to be serious in this world. Got to be serious in this movement.
Support national liberation in peripheral social formations, or in the global south. And there were 212.
If a discussion will not lead to us coming to a closer understanding of how we can liberate our comrades from these hell camps, that discussion really should not be being had.
Other third worldists with sort of not infighting.
All right, I got to get ready for Socialist Night School, and I'm pretty sure you all have homework to do. So peace.
Yeah, they don't.
And listen to JD Pod, comrades. Kasama. I literally just said comrade. Kasama is Filipino, Tagalog for comrade. So, yeah, listen to JD Pod with comrades or Kasamas, Joma, and Nate. Peace. If I had one bullet, I had. When am I coming back to DC? I don't know. When there's something that attracts me and brings me to DC. But peace. And Persian and STL, I better see you at Socialist Night School tonight.